Okay, let's jump right in with a pretty wild idea. What if the real key to understanding, well, everything, from our own minds to the entire universe, isn't about what's there? What if it's all about what's missing? And not just accidentally missing, but necessarily, structurally gone. And to see what that means, let's look at something happening right now. You've probably seen this, right? These incredibly powerful AIs that just confidently lie. They make stuff up. We call them hallucinations. But why do they do that? Why state something totally false with so much certainty?
Well, the source material for this explainer has a really brilliant diagnosis for this. It says these AIs operate in what's called a topologically flat space. Now, that sounds complicated, but think of it like this. Imagine a perfectly smooth, flat sheet of paper. If you ask the AI to get from point A to point B, it has to draw a line. There are no bumps, no holes, no gaps, no way for it to say, hey, I can't get there from here. Its world is totally complete, totally seamless. So when there's no logical path, it can't just stop. It's forced to invent one. It's forced to fill in the gap. And that is the hallucination.
All right, so to really unpack this whole idea, we're going to walk through 5 main steps. We'll start with this paradox of perfection, then get into the actual architecture of lack, look at its core, the generative singularity, see how this pattern shows up everywhere, and then finally talk about what this means for actually building things, like AI. So let's kick things off with Section 1, the paradox of perfection. This is a really counterintuitive idea, that being perfect, being a system with no gaps or flaws, is actually a death sentence. It dooms a system to being static and ultimately lifeless. And this really gets to the heart of it. On the one hand, you've got these flat systems, like the AIs we were just talking about. They're complete, static, no gaps. But then, look at the other side, viable systems, things like life or a human mind. They are fundamentally incomplete, dynamic, and structured by holes. The source material has a fancy term for this, non-trivial cohomology. But don't worry about the jargon. All it really means is that for a system to be alive, for it to adapt and grow, it absolutely must have these gaps. It needs those holes in its own logic to function.
Okay, so that brings us to our second section, the architecture of lack. If having these holes is so important, how does that actually work? Well, this theory proposes this really elegant, universal architecture for how all living systems operate. And it's all built around 4 key gestures that work together in a cycle.
And here they are: emergence, memory, propagation, and residue. Now, this isn't just a simple list. It's a process, a continuous loop. You have emergence, which is the creation of new things. Then memory comes in to stabilize and hold on to those things. Propagation connects everything together. And then there's residue. That's the friction, the contradiction that forces the whole system to keep changing and evolving.
And that last one, residue, is absolutely crucial. See, in one of those flat AI systems, residue, a paradox, a contradiction, would be seen as an error, a bug that you need to fix. But in a living, viable system, it's the most important feature. It's the internal friction, the necessary nonsense that stops the system from just freezing in place and dying. You could say it's literally the engine of life.
All right, which leads us to Section 3, the generative singularity. And this is where things get really deep. If all this friction and all these little gaps are what make a system work, then what's at the very center of it all? What's the ultimate gap? This is the idea of a generative void, a void at the center of everything. It's a pretty stunning claim when you think about it. The theory is that every living system has a hole at its center. We're talking about everything from a single cell to your own mind to the entire cosmos.
And again, this hole is not a mistake. It's not a flaw that needs to be fixed. It is the very source of the system itself. It's what gives it structure and energy. So, this central void gets a name. It's called G0, or the generative singularity. The best way to think about it is like the ultimate unanswerable question at the core of any system. It's this point that the system can never ever reach, a hole it can never fill. And because it can't be filled, the entire system is forced to constantly spiral around it, always changing, always adapting, always becoming. And this quote really sums it up perfectly. For a system to live, for it to be dynamic, that central point, G0, has to be excluded. It has to be this hole that everything turns around but can never actually touch. That's what keeps the system open and alive.
Okay, so this is where the theory goes from being interesting to being, frankly, mind-blowing. Let's move to Section 4, the universal spiral.
because the argument here is that this isn't just a theory about minds or AI, it's a fundamental pattern of reality itself.
Just look at this table. It's showing how the exact same architecture plays out across physics, cognition, and society. Take that central void, G0. In physics, it's the Big Bang singularity, the point everything came from, but a point we can never go back to. In our own minds, it's that ultimate, unanswerable question that sparks all our curiosity. And in society, it's a foundational myth, or a core taboo, something the entire culture is built around, but can never fully articulate or resolve. It's the same pattern again and again.
So, you see, whether we're talking about how a healthy mind avoids falling into rigid dogma or how the universe itself got its structure, this principle of a necessary void seems to hold true. And this has real-world consequences. The theory points out that totalitarianism is basically a deadly attempt to create a flat society, to get rid of all that messy friction, that residue. And in doing so, it kills the very thing that makes a society alive.
Which brings us to our final section, engineering the void. Okay, so what's the point of all this? Is it just cool philosophy? Not at all. This has huge, practical implications, especially for how we're trying to build the future. And here we are, full circle, right back to that question about AI. What this theory suggests is that if we want to build true intelligence, an AI that doesn't just make things up, we have to stop trying to just cram it full of facts. We need to engineer the ability to understand its own limits, to navigate the unknown.
So the big shift in thinking is this. The goal isn't an AI that knows everything. That's the old way. The goal is an AI that knows what it doesn't know. We need to stop chasing statistical perfection and start building for structural integrity. We need to give our AIs their own version of zero Bagro, a built-in awareness of their own boundaries, their own necessary gaps.
And I want to leave you with this final thought from the source material, because it just wraps this all up so perfectly. Reality is the spiral structure between what is and what cannot be said. It's a powerful reminder that everything that matters, life, meaning, even reality itself, isn't found in the solid things we can point to. It exists in that beautiful, creative, endless dance between what we know and that generative void of what we can never know.